think about your own brain for a second. Like, really think about it. How is it possible that you hold this massive, um, just this complex web of knowledge when you were only explicitly taught, a tiny fraction of it?
Right. I mean, no one sat down and painstakingly trained you on every single fact you know.
Exactly. You weren't directly trained on all of it. Your brain just somehow filled in the gaps. It generated new knowledge totally for free.
It's honestly one of the coolest things about human behavior.
It really is. And welcome to this special deep dive, tailored specifically for you as part of the Behavioral Intelligence Con Mara Sánchez BCBA exam preparation series. Today, we have a really highly testable mission on our hands.
Oh, absolutely. We are mastering domain B, specifically B.21 of the BCBA exam.
Right, which is identifying examples of processes that promote emergent relations and generative performance. So, okay, let's unpack this. How does this free learning actually happen, and how do behavior analysts harness it clinically?
Well, to really get into the mechanics of that, we have to establish what we actually mean by generative learning and emergent relations.
Right, because definitions are everything on this exam.
Exactly.
Oh.
So in behavior analysis, we are incredibly precise about what is taught versus what is actually learned. Normally, we think of learning as like the direct result of a specific contingency.
Antecedent, behavior, consequence, the classic ABCs.
Right. You provide an antecedent, the learner responds, you provide a consequence, boom. But generative learning, it kind of throws a fascinating curveball into that standard model.
A really useful curveball, though.
Oh, for sure. It occurs when a learner demonstrates an understanding of relations between stimuli that were never directly trained together.
They just sort of emerge as a logical byproduct of the things you did teach.
Exactly.
Our sources actually highlight this classic size comparison example to conceptualize this, which I love. Imagine you're working with a learner. First, you explicitly teach them that a watermelon is larger than a baseball.
Okay, so that's train relation number one.
Right. Then, in a completely separate teaching trial, you teach them that a car is larger than a watermelon. That is train relation number 2.
So you've put in the effort to teach two distinct facts. Watermelon beats baseball.
Yep.
Car beats watermelon.
Yep. And because of those two separate train relations, the learner can now logically infer that a car is larger than a baseball.
Even though you never directly taught them the relationship between the car and the baseball.
Never. You never placed a car and a baseball side by side and reinforced them for saying the car is bigger. The knowledge simply, it just emerged.
It's brilliant.
It's like a buy two, get one free sale for the brain. You put in the effort to explicitly teach two stimulus relations, and the brain generates that third one entirely for free.
That's a great way to put it.
But I do want to pause here and ask a clinically grounded question. If this free learning happens automatically, like if the brain just naturally infers that a car is bigger than a baseball, why is this an entire domain on the BCBA exam?
That's a fair question.
Right. Like, why do we have to deliberately program for it if human brains are already wired to do it?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, we really have to remember the clinical populations we often serve.
Okay, right.
For many individuals with, severe developmental delays or early learners, that overarching operant of deriving relationships hasn't actually been established yet.
It's not just magic.
No, not at all.
Right.
It is a learned history. A neurotypical brain has this massive history of being reinforced for making connections, which teaches the overarching rule of equivalence.
So they've learned how to learn those freebies.
Exactly. But when a learner lacks that history, we have to teach the foundational nodes like the key relationships and systematically build their behavioral repertoire so it can expand naturally.
Because we can't possibly meticulously train every single real-world scenario a client will ever encounter.
There simply isn't enough time in a lifetime. Programming for generative performance is like the ultimate efficiency hack of behavior analysis.
I love that, the efficiency hack. And that structural framework the brain relies on to get that free learning is known in the literature as stimulus equivalence.
Yes, heavily tested on the exam.
Right, the classic A equals B, B equals C, therefore A equals C math. And for a learner to demonstrate true stimulus equivalence, they have to demonstrate 3 absolute requirements.
Reflexivity, symmetry, and transitivity.
Yes. And without all 3 of those,
You do not have stimulus equivalence, period. They are the mandatory pillars of the entire concept.
Okay, let's look at the first one, reflexivity. This is the A equals A relation, right?
Yep. Reflexivity is simply the ability to match identical stimuli. It's generalized identity matching to sample.
So like handing a learner a picture of a cat, presenting an array of pictures on the table, and the learner matching that cat picture to an identical copy of that exact same cat picture.
Exactly. Or, matching a real physical ball to another real physical ball. A equals A.
See, wait, A equals A. I have to push back on this being a pillar of advanced learning. Yeah, I mean, matching a cat picture to the exact same cat picture seems almost, I don't know, too simple. Children do that with basic memory games at age 2.
Sure they do.
So why is a basic matching skill considered a mandatory testable foundation for something as advanced as complex language equivalence? It feels like we're just stating the obvious.
Well, what's fascinating here is it only seems obvious to you because your verbal repertoire and your history of generalized identity matching are highly developed.
Oh, okay, fair point.
The concept of sameness is actually a learned behavioral prerequisite. If a learner doesn't possess the foundational ability to recognize that a stimulus is identical to itself, like that this physical object shares exact formal properties with this other physical object, they cannot possibly participate in arbitrary stimulus classes.
So reflexivity really is the bedrock.
It is. We aren't just teaching them to match one cat to one cat. By teaching them to match 50 different identical items, we create a generalized operand where they can match any novel identical item.
They learn the overarching rule of sameness.
Exactly. If you can't do A equals A, you can never do A equals B.
Wow. Okay, you have to prove you understand same before you can understand equivalent. That reframes it completely for me.
Good. So then we move to the second pillar, which is symmetry.
Right, the A equals B, therefore B equals A relation.
Yes, it is all about reversibility. A trained relationship must be shown to go both ways, even if you only trained it in one direction.
The mock exam from our sources uses a great simple scenario for this. A child is explicitly taught the relationship. Jill is faster than Joey.
Okay, so that is A equals B.
Right, and then the child derives, without any direct teaching, that Joey is slower than Jill.
Which is B equals A. The relationship reversed perfectly.
We can also see this in basic matching tasks, right?
Oh, absolutely. Say you teach a learner to match a picture of a person named Bob to the spoken name Bob. You hand them the picture, you ask, who is this? And they say, Bob. That is A to B.
And so symmetry is demonstrated when you say the word Bob, and without any extra training, the learner can point out the picture of Bob from an array.
You got it. B to A.
So symmetry explains how a two-way street works. But human language isn't just a single street, right? It's an entire map.
Well, it's a massive tangled web.
Yeah. So how does the learner jump from understanding two isolated things to connecting 3 or 4 separate concepts that have never even interacted?
Well, that requires the third and final pillar, transitivity.
The grand finale of stimulus equivalence, where A equals C.
Exactly. Transitivity requires the emergence of an untrained but logically relevant relation based on 2 other trained relations. It is like the ultimate leap in generative learning.
I like to think of transitivity like a currency exchange.
Okay, how so?
Well, if I know that $1 is equal to €1, and I also know that €1 is equal to 100 Japanese yen, I don't need a bank to explicitly teach me the relationship between the dollar and the yen.
Right, you automatically derive that $1 equals 100 yen.
Exactly, I just cut out the middleman.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. Applying that to the classic clinical example from our texts. First, you train the learner that a real physical rubber ball is equivalent to a photograph of a ball. A equals B.
Got it.
Then you train them that the photograph of the ball is equivalent to the written word ball. B equals C.
So the learner now has 2 separate trained bridges.
Right, so transitivity is when the learner can now match the real physical rubber ball directly to the written letters B-A-L-L.
Matching A directly to C.
Yes. Without you ever having explicitly trained that specific direct relationship, they connected the nodes on their own.
You know, understanding the abstract A equals B equals C math is super necessary for passing the exam. But seeing how this architecture is applied clinically to radically transform a human life, I think that's what actually cements the concept.
Totally agree. It's life-changing stuff.
Let's look at the historical benchmark from our sources for this. Murray Sidman's monumental 1971 experiment.
Oh, yeah. Every behavior analyst needs to understand the weight of the Sidman study.
It's iconic.
It really is. Sidman was working with a teenager who had severe intellectual delays. And before the experiment, this teenager had a very specific hard ceiling on his communication skills.
He could match pictures to their dictated names, right?
Yes, so hearing the spoken word car and pointing to a picture of a car. And he can also name pictures out loud expressively.
But he had absolutely zero reading skills.
Right. He could not read a single written word.
So Sidman introduced one highly specific, targeted intervention. He didn't try to teach the teenager everything all at once.
No, that would be overwhelming.
He simply taught the teenager to match written names to dictated names. That's it. If Sidman spoke the word boy, he trained the teenager to select the written letters B-O-Y.
He directly trained that one specific relation, which gave the teenager the crucial B=C connection.
And because the teenager already possessed the A=B repertoire matching a dictated name to a picture.
And Sidman just gave him the B=C repertoire matching a dictated name to a written word.
The results were just astounding. Here's where it gets really interesting. From that single, isolated, trained relation, an entire network of derived relations suddenly blossomed.
The sheer exponential math of the learning was staggering.
It's wild.
It is. The teenager could suddenly match written names directly to pictures without training. He could match pictures directly to written names without training.
And most profoundly, he could suddenly read the written words aloud, expressively.
Yes, an entirely new skill, reading, emerged purely through the behavioral mechanism of stimulus equivalence.
It's just incredible. Sidman proved that we can exponentially expand a learner's receptive and expressive language repertoire without having to painstakingly provide direct instruction for every single iteration.
We just have to strategically teach the correct intersecting nodes.
Our sources also mention a much more modern example of this kind of generative performance happening out in the wild.
Oh, the Google search one.
Yeah. Let's say you are teaching a learner how to search Google for pictures of animals. You directly train the sequence, open the browser, type lion, click on the Images tab.
Okay, very clear, discrete steps.
Right. The generative performance is when that learner independently starts searching for articles, videos, or blogs about those animals.
Even though you never train them to search for blogs.
Exactly. The stimulus of the search engine, combined with the concept of the animal, generated a novel, functionally related behavior.
Because ultimately, we want our clients to take the finite tools we give them and use them to independently explore an infinite world. That is the ultimate goal of clinical practice.
Beautifully said. But knowing how this generative learning blossoms naturally leads us into how behavior analysts can accidentally sabotage it.
Oh yes, the pitfalls.
And not coincidentally, this happens to be exactly how the BCBA exam tries to trick test takers on domain B21. We need to talk about the exam traps.
We absolutely do, because the test writers know exactly where students slip up.
They really do.
They prey on the fact that practitioners naturally want to be thorough. But in the context of emergent relations, being overly thorough is a fatal flaw. Let's examine exam trap number 1. Over-teaching.
Yes. The mock exam in our sources has a brutal question on this. It asks which scenario is most likely to result in derived relations.
And one of the distractor answer choices is something like teaching all the relations between a football and a basketball, their use, their shape, their color, the material they're made of, etc.
Which, in the heat of an exam, sounds like fantastic comprehensive teaching.
Right. It sounds like best practice until you remember the core definition of the domain. Why is that the wrong answer for derived relations?
Because you literally taught everything.
Exactly. Because if you systematically and explicitly teach every single relation between those two items, you leave absolutely nothing left for the student to derive.
Derived relations, by definition, are untrained.
If you train everything, nothing is derived.
You essentially stole the free learning right out from under them. And as we discussed with the efficiency hack earlier, this is highly inefficient clinical practice.
You are burning valuable, limited instructional time manually teaching connections that the learner's brain would have automatically synthesized on its own.
And time is our most precious resource in clinical intervention. Overteaching just wastes it.
It really does. Now, let's move to exam trap number 2, which trips up an enormous number of students.
Oh, this one is tricky.
It's confusing stimulus generalization with stimulus equivalence. Our sources provide a perfect scenario to illustrate the difference. Let's look at Amy.
Right. Okay. So Amy is a toddler.
Yeah.
Amy's dad has a prominent beard and a mustache. Through direct contingencies, she learns to call him Dada.
Okay, that is a trained relation.
A week later, Amy is at the grocery store. She sees a completely different man she has never met before, who also has a beard. She points at him and says, Dada. She basically starts calling all men with beards Dada.
A classic toddler move.
Totally. Now, I want to play devil's advocate here. I am sitting for the BCBA exam. I see this question. I think to myself, Amy applied a trained response to a completely novel, untrained stimulus. That is the definition of emergent learning. That must be equivalence.
It sounds so convincing when you say it like that.
Right. So why is my logic flawed?
Your logic is flawed because you are ignoring the formal properties of the stimuli. This is classic stimulus generalization, not equivalence.
Formal properties, meaning what they look like.
Exactly. Look closely at the stimuli. Amy's dad and the stranger at the store. They share distinct physical formal properties. They both have facial hair.
Ah, okay.
The antecedent stimulus of the facial hair is evoking the response. Stimulus generalization occurs when similar physical stimuli evoke the same response.
Because they physically look alike, the response generalizes. So how does that fundamentally differ from the mechanics of equivalence?
Stimulus equivalence requires arbitrary stimuli. Yes, these are stimuli that do not look alike, sound alike, or feel alike in any way. Think back to our earlier example. A physical, bouncy rubber ball shares absolutely zero formal physical properties with the written letters B-A-L-L.
Right, they don't share a shape, a color, or a texture.
Yet, through stimulus equivalence, we understand they represent the exact same concept. That is arbitrary equivalence. If Amy calls a bearded stranger da-da, she is generalizing based on physical similarity.
But if Amy saw the written word father on a piece of paper and accurately matched it to a photograph of her dad...
That would be equivalence.
So what does this all mean? When you sit down for that exam, how do you actually avoid these pitfalls?
You have to ruthlessly trust your operational definitions.
Are you going to fall for the over-teaching trap? Remember, if it's derived, it means it was never directly taught.
And are you going to confuse physical similarity with arbitrary equivalence? Remember, if it's equivalence, the stimuli must be arbitrary. They cannot share formal properties.
Keep those clinical rules at the forefront of your mind, and you will navigate domain B.21 with absolute confidence.
Trusting the definitions is the key to the entire exam. If you systematically apply the strict definitions of reflexivity, symmetry, and transitivity, the distractor answers will literally just fall away.
The behavior of the exam itself is predictable once you understand the contingencies.
That is so true. This raises an important question, though. We spent all our time analyzing this system of arbitrary connections as a clinical tool, right? For teaching language and academic skills.
Right.
But what happens when this mechanism operates incidentally out in the real world? If our brains are constantly automatically building these untrained A=C bridges through stimulus equivalence, how might this behavioral process explain the formation of our own unconscious biases?
Wow. That is a fascinating extrapolation.
Think about the media we consume every single day. What happens when our environment, like a news broadcast or a film, accidentally or intentionally pairs two completely arbitrary concepts together?
Okay, I'm following.
Suppose a specific demographic of people, we'll call them Group A, is consistently paired on television with a specific negative event, condition B. Our brain learns the trained relation, A=B.
Even if it's not actually true, our brain just logs the pairing.
Exactly. Now, condition B naturally elicits a physiological feeling of fear or mistrust condition C.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Through transitivity, our brain automatically and silently derives A=C. We derive a flawed, potentially harmful assumption about an entire group of people without ever being explicitly taught to do so.
And often without us ever realizing the derivation even happened.
Exactly. The exact same overarching behavioral operant that allows a nonverbal teenager to suddenly read for the very first time might also be the precise mechanism that quietly constructs our deepest prejudices.
The architecture of human learning really doesn't care if the connections are beneficial or harmful, true or false. It just builds the bridges. It executes the generalized operant.
It's powerful and a little scary.
That is an incredibly powerful concept to chew on as you prepare for this field. And we are going to wrap up our deep dive right there. We want to invite you to keep crushing your exam prep by continuing the Behavioral Intelligence Con Mara Sánchez BCBA study series.
The concepts we dissected today really represent the elegance of behavior analysis.
Master them, and you're going to be an incredibly effective, efficient clinician. Be sure to follow Amethyst Therapy Services for more high-quality resources and study materials. You can find everything you need to succeed at their website. That is www.amethystrapiservices.com.
Or if you have specific clinical questions or want to reach out directly, drop an email to info@amethysttherapyservices.com.
You absolutely have the tools, the clinical intelligence, and the drive to conquer this exam.
Right.
Keep analyzing those complex webs of knowledge, trust your training, and we will see you on the next deep dive.